Alabama's prison system is generating a lot of controversy after trying and failing to execute 2 death row prisoners last year.
So today, we're going to talk about how the state of Alabama has botched, and I mean botched, executions of convicted killers. Essentially, they tried and failed to kill them. Now, the state wants a second chance to kill these men. But that now brings a whole bunch of legal problems. Is this cruel and unusual punishment? Should they even get a second chance? Let's talk about it.
First state to execute a prisoner by making him breathe only nitrogen. The Alabama Attorney General's office asked the state Supreme Court to set an execution date for death row inmate Kenneth Smith. The court filing indicated Alabama plans to put him to death by nitrogen hypoxia, an execution method that is authorized in 3 states but has never been used.
Okay, so let me give you the details of this case. This is Kenneth Smith. He was convicted of a murder for hire scheme back in 1988. Now, the victim was a pastor's wife. Her name was Elizabeth Sonnett. Now, he was hired by the pastor, Paul Sonnett, who wanted to collect on the insurance money and run away with his mistress. Now, Smith shot Elizabeth Sonnett in the head while she was sleeping in her home in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was sentenced to death in 1996. So the state set an execution date to send Smith to the afterlife.
And tomorrow, the state is set to execute a man convicted in a murder for hire in 1988. A pastor hired 57-year-old Kenneth Smith to kill his wife for $1,000. The pastor killed himself a week later. Smith is scheduled to die tomorrow.
But the state botched that execution.
Smith's attorneys say that he was repeatedly jabbed with needles in his arms and hands. They say he was also injected with an unknown substance believed to be a sedative or an anesthetic, both of which he previously objected to. Smith's attorneys say this went on for another hour until the state called off the execution. Smith was sentenced to death following a murder for hire plot back in 1988.
So Smith was returned to his cell, and his lawyers filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of a second execution attempt by any method. Now, while that was occurring, the state came up with another plan. They decided to change the way they put people to death. They came up with this.
First state to execute a prisoner by making him breathe only nitrogen. The Alabama Attorney General's office asked the state Supreme Court to set an execution date for death row inmate Kenneth Smith. The court filing indicated Alabama plans to put him to death by nitrogen hypoxia, an execution method that is authorized in 3 states but has never been used. Nitrogen hypoxia is caused by forcing the inmate to breathe only nitrogen, depriving them of oxygen and causing them to die. Alabama authorized nitrogen hypoxia in 2018 after a shortage of drugs used to carry out lethal injections.
Now, you would think this wouldn't be such a problem, but it seems to be a big problem in these death penalty states. See, other states are even bringing back other forms of execution because lethal injection doesn't seem to work the majority of the time.
There are these other states who have other methods, right? Like Idaho is reinstituting the firing squad. Are you listening, Brian Koberger? Death penalty case, quadruple murder. And the firing squad, that went into effect just a month ago, July 1st, right? 2 months ago. And they're building the actual chamber for firing. And if they go on the Utah model, so you get seated, on a wood panel like this with the sandbags on either side, and the 5 shooters, they all line up in a wall. They each have 2 rounds, but one of the shooters has blanks. Nobody knows who it is. In South Carolina, where they also have that form of death penalty, the firing squad, you're actually strapped to a metal chair. And there's a hood placed over your head, and 3 Department of Corrections volunteers have rifles. They shoot through an opening in the wall.
That's right. You heard that. Firing squad. Now, some experts and Smith's legal team argue that nitrogen hypoxia may violate the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment, and that Smith has not yet exhausted all his appeals.
How cruel and unusual is it to breathe in nitrogen and pass out and then eventually die while you're passed out?
Well, we just don't know. I mean, that is the question. And part of the question that we're all asking here is why is Alabama turning to this method now? Now, you said a moment ago that Mr. Smith wants to be killed by nitrogen hypoxia. It should be noted that the state of Alabama tried to kill him using lethal injection. They spent 4 hours jabbing him with needles, trying to find a vein on his body before they ultimately abandoned this effort. So I think it's pretty reasonable for Mr. Smith not to want to endure another torturous session like that with lethal injection. So he's actually chosen the alternate that Alabama has on its books. But I think we can say probably with surety that Mr. Smith doesn't want to be facing either one of those methods of execution.
Oh, I can imagine, but he doesn't have a choice at this point. It's more, what's available. Maybe his choice is what's the least of the evils to him.
So Smith's lawyers took his case all the way up to the Alabama Supreme Court, and he had two main arguments. One, that this nitrogen hypoxia could be cruel and unusual punishment, and that a second execution attempt is essentially unconstitutional, right? You've put me all in this fear, you've tried to kill me before, you messed up. That's it. It should end. Now, the Alabama Supreme Court did not agree with these arguments and essentially just said, hey, we're going to do it again. And in a 6-2 decision, the court ordered the governor to set a new execution date for Smith.
The state is planning to move forward with an execution using nitrogen hypoxia. In a 6-2 vote, the Alabama Supreme Court essentially paved the way for the execution of Kenneth Smith. He killed a woman in 1988.
So it comes down to this. What do you think about this case? Do you think the court was right in their decision? Or do you think that nitrogen hypoxia is unethical or an experimental execution method? What about the court allowing multiple executions? See, the fact is that this man was sentenced to death, and that death did not occur. So essentially the court is saying that sentence wasn't carried out. And until he's dead, that's when the sentence is carried out. Botched execution and all. Now, I want to be very clear. I have no sympathy for a convicted killer, but I think it's interesting how states are now having problems or these little minor issues in trying to kill people convicted of these serious crimes and sentenced to death. Let me know how you feel in the comment section, because I do understand the argument for the death penalty, but at this point in time, if you can't do it in a way that's humane, is it even right to do it at all? What would be some methods of killing people that wouldn't be cruel and unusual? It's a weird problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.